John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. But first, we'll start on the NFL side of things. John, of course, covers the league nationally, FanRag Sports NFL. And, John, yesterday we discussed how the Eagles had taken their good old time last year in hiring a head coach. This year, January 11th, no one had made a hire. That was back at 2 when we started the show. Well, now by 4, 2 spots have been filled. Let's start with the first one today. I'm a little surprised about Vance Joseph getting the job in Denver. How did they end up going with Vance Joseph in Denver?
Well, I'm a little surprised at the beginning, but as things developed, it became pretty clear that John Elway had a serious interest in him, and that was the way he wanted to go. And it was sort of Vance had another interview scheduled in San Diego, so it was one of those things where he didn't want to let him out of the building, and they hammered it out, and it's a very good situation for Vance Joseph, obviously, and we talked about it last week on the show. I don't necessarily think it's the greatest hire, and that's not anything to speak of Vance Joseph. I just think if you think about what Denver was defensively with Wade Phillips as the coordinator, it's hard to get better than that. And now you're hiring a very, very young head coach who was a secondary coach 2 years ago in Cincinnati. Has had 1 year as a defensive coordinator in Miami, pretty much middle of the pack. There was some good, there was some bad. And now, all of a sudden, you got to take over a unit that's coached by one of the best defensive coordinators in history. And that's the pretty high bar set. So when I talked about Doug Marrone going into a great situation in Jacksonville, this is a very, very difficult situation, I think, for Vance Joseph.
Vance Joseph in Denver. Interesting names potentially for the offensive coordinator there. Bill Musgrave, who just left Oakland, 6th-ranked offense, and the former Broncos coordinator, Mike McCoy, who was the head coach in San Diego. He had been tied to potentially joining McDermott, who just got hired in Buffalo. More on that in a minute. But could McCoy be a fit back in Denver?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Things kind of clarify themselves. And there was a strange situation in Oakland where the Raiders let Bill Musgrave walk, despite the fact that he put together the 6th best offense in the NFL, and they elevated their quarterbacks coach, Todd Downing. It now comes out that Vance Joseph wanted Downing to be his offensive coordinator in Denver. So that kind of clarifies things in Oakland, why they made a bit of a strange move. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions. Jack Del Rio didn't want to lose a good young coach, so he elevates him. And now Denver has to go back probably. Mike McCoy would be the number 1 choice now. But as you mentioned, Sean McDermott also wants him in Buffalo, so he's going to have some options. And then Musgrave would probably be number 2 if McCoy goes with McDermott in Buffalo.
Interesting stuff there. And McDermott, let's go to him. 42 years old, former Eagles defensive coordinator. I find it interesting. I was joking about this at the top of the show. McDermott gets to the Super Bowl. He's not good enough. He's got a terrible defense this year, and all of a sudden he's qualified. I mean, that's not to say you're qualified or not qualified, but it's just funny how that works out. Why is now the time for McDermott for Buffalo? Because Buffalo, Lynn seemed like the guy, and, there was a lot of other names around Buffalo. McDermott just kind of came in the last couple of days here, and he's been all over the last couple of years. So why does McDermott finally get his opportunity in Buffalo?
Well, I liked him, and he had a home run in the interview, so sometimes it is the interview that can put you over the top. And that seems to be the case for an organization that was leaning towards just taking the interim tag off Anthony Lynn. So the fact is that he got there and ownership liked him, and he's got a head coach. Now, you mentioned it's very, very difficult in this league, Mike, to get a head coaching job when you make a deep playoff run. And one of the reasons I just tweeted about it is you have to wait. And if you have to wait more than anything else, that's not the problem. Because if you like a guy, you like a guy. But what happens is generally teams go quicker, and one of the reasons they do is because the assistant coach market dries up very, very quickly. So if you wait for whomever wins the Super Bowl or even loses the Super Bowl, then you're probably not going to be able to get the coaching staff you want with that head coach. So you remember back in the day, Brad Childress here in Philadelphia with Andy Reid, he didn't get the job when the Eagles went to the Super Bowl. He got the job the year after. And that's one of the reasons, because it's very, very difficult to wait. And, you know, if you're a good coach, you're a good coach, and people know it in this league, and people think Sean McDermott is. Mm-hmm. But so that kind of explains, though it does make more sense, why aren't you getting the job after the 15-1 season?
Yeah.
Instead of that.
Well, a lot of people, you remember last year, the Eagles fans were kind of clamoring for him to come back. It was like, hey, let's get a defensive-minded guy after Chip. And McDermott kind of, the polish was a little bit more on there from when he got fired because of the 15-1 season he had in Carolina. People were like, oh, maybe this guy does know what he's talking about.
Yeah, and it's really, you remember last year here, I mean, people were starting to whisper as guys went off the board. You know, Adam Gase gets hired.
The Eagles never officially interviewed McDermott, correct?
No. But it's very, very difficult to wait. And there's a lot of pressure. And some teams can do it. I think the 49ers are doing it. I think the 49ers want Josh McDaniels. We'll see if that works out. But it's really, really hard.
Why do you take that job if you're Josh McDaniel?
You know,
I mean, I get it. You're a head coach as opposed to a coordinator. But if you're the offensive coordinator in New England, don't you think, okay, I got to get something better? I mean, isn't San Francisco a disaster right now? If you're in New England, isn't that a better situation and just wait for something that you would rather feel more stable with? Because, I mean, come on, San Francisco's a ways off.
It is. It is a disaster. You can look at it in two different ways. First of all, it seems like Josh is finally ready. Remember, he had a bad first opportunity to be a head coach in this league, one of the worst I've ever seen, as a matter of fact, when he was in Denver. But, you know, San Francisco has a great history. When they are going well, it's probably one of the marquee jobs in this league. And, yeah, they have a long way to go, obviously. They have to hire a general manager also. But if you get the right group in there and you have confidence in yourself, we've seen time and time again, you can turn things around very, very quickly in this league. And all of a sudden, what looks like a bad situation is one of the best situations, because if San Francisco is a good team, it's going to be easy to draw free agents. It's going to be easy to sort of recruit players and that nature. And then the part is, hey, you know, they're so bad, you know they're going to be better in the short term. So you get that bump, and that probably gives you an extra year or two before people start really, really putting the microscope on.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Of course, national columnist for FanRag Sports NFL as well. We're looking at all the NFL stuff. I'm interested in this one as well because inside the division, Redskins looking at ex-Jaguars head coach Gus Bradley. Of course, where he got his brightest star was as the defensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. Would that be something that would be, a big hire for the Redskins inside the division?
Yeah, it certainly would. I mean, they're obviously looking at. There was talk of Wade Phillips. That's kind of teetered out a little bit, but they're looking at high-profile names, and they obviously want to improve that side of the ball. Gus proved himself. He was a terrible head coach, but he was a heck of a coordinator in Seattle. So I think that would be a big step forward for the Redskins on that side of the football, and he might be one of those guys that's just a heck of a coordinator like Rod Marinelli, but not much of a head coach.
Yeah, no, that's there's a lot of guys like that. Wade Phillips is one of those guys. Better coordinator, and not the great head coach. There's no shame in that, obviously. But Bradley was a good coordinator. What about Anthony Lynn? What's his story now? I mean, he seemed like he was the hot name. He was in Buffalo, but everybody else wanted a piece of him. And then it was like he thought maybe Buffalo isn't where he wanted to be, so he started interviewing around. His name is kind of fizzled out.
Yeah, it has. I mean, there were 6 openings. He interviewed for 5 of them. So that tells you he was a pretty hot name. And now we see, Doug Marrone has the Jacksonville job. We got 2 more today, and Vance Joseph and Sean McDermott. I think Sean McVay is going to get the Rams job. I think Josh McDaniels is the leader if he wants it in San Francisco. And that leaves San Diego, and that's it. So it dries up quickly. And unfortunately for him, it's looking like he's not going to be a head coach after it looked like almost a fait accompli that he was going back to Buffalo. And things can shift dramatically in this league.
Yes, and there are a lot of some coordinator spots because once you get new coaches, they typically clear out some coordinator situations as well. But here's a guy who interviews for 5 jobs. You wonder where he even ends up. What kind of job he gets if he when it all comes out in the wash.
Yeah, and I say the one guy more than anyone, and that's what we talked about. Generally, when you have deep playoff runs, it's difficult for you. The name I gave right away that was going to get a job is Kyle Shanahan, and now it looks like he's not going to get a job. And that's one of the reasons why is because the Atlanta Falcons are still playing. And in a weird way, if they lose, it would help them. If they win, he's not going to be a head coach. And that's kind of the dichotomy I think the NFL should address.
Yeah.
Because they do make it really, really difficult for coordinators of good teams to get head coaching jobs.
Yeah, I brought that up at the beginning of the show about how, it doesn't seem fair, that, number one, okay, you're Vance Joseph, you're getting ready for the Pittsburgh game, and yet you have head coaching interview during the week, you're preparing for that. It just seems that there's, too much going on there that the NFL should maybe step in and help both the teams that are getting ready for playoff games and to make it a fair playing field for the guys who are succeeding in the playoffs, and maybe they should have some sort of hiring freeze until a certain date.
Yeah, I don't disagree with it. I really don't, because it is unfair, the guys who are doing the best job. And it happens every season. You just talked about the dichotomy of Sean McDermott. And I mentioned Brad Childress here in Philadelphia back in the day. It happens every year where coordinators go so deep. And you look at the Patriots coordinators specifically. Matt Patricia got 1 interview. McDaniels got a number. And they're still, as every day goes by, the Patriots have beat the Texans. They're going to the AFC Championship game. They're the odds-on favorite to go to the Super Bowl, and that just the time keeps churning. And as I said, the longer you wait, the longer, if you want Josh McDaniels, the longer he's not going to be able to put together the staff that he wants, because those guys are going to reach for jobs if they're offered jobs.
Right.
So it is something the NFL should address, but people have been talking about that for years, and they've never done it.
So there were 6. We're down to 3. Give us your best guess for the final 3. San Diego, L.A., San Francisco.
Well, for the Rams, I really think they're going to hire Sean McVay, who would be the youngest coach in NFL history.
How old is he?
He is 30 years old.
It makes me feel like a big loser. Although I started coaching Babe Ruth baseball at 27. Take that, McVay.
Yeah, and Josh McDaniels. And by the way, that's the largest team. This league is just crazy. No offense to Sean McVay, but I mean, what has he done to prove to be a head coach in this league? But everyone is looking for the next guy. He's going to be there. I talk about it all the time. He's going to be there for 20 years. Vance Joseph is 44. Sean McDermott's 42.
So you're saying I have a chance?
Yeah, sure. Adam Gase was 38. Lane Kiffin was the youngest coach in NFL history to this point. He was 31 when he got a head coaching job. And how did that work out?
Completely not prepared.
Yeah, this league.
And for those listening out there, John McVay, can you give a little background on him?
He was the Redskins offensive coordinator. Is the Redskins offensive coordinator, and obviously he's given a lot of credit for the development of Kirk Cousins. And people have a lot of respect, and I always go Vance Joseph too. But when people talk about how does Marvin Lewis stick around in Cincinnati, it's because everybody in this league has so much respect for that program. It's all branches off that. Jay Gruden, Mike Zimmer, obviously in Minnesota, Hugh Jackson in Cleveland. Vance Joseph really took off as an assistant coach when he was the secondary coach in Cincinnati.
And that's a guy. There's a guy, by the way, in Cincinnati. I'm surprised. Paul Guenther, whose name I know they didn't have a great year, but he was a name last year, and he didn't get a sniff this year.
Yeah, well, I think the sniff he got this year was that if Marvin was going to retire, he was going to be elevated to the head coach in Cincinnati. So that might be the ultimate plan, because Marvin Lewis has 1 year left on his deal. So if he does retire and goes up into the front office in Cincinnati, which a lot of people think is the ultimate plan, Paul Guenther would then be the head coach, the next head coach in Cincinnati.
Gotcha.
But obviously Jay Gruden goes to Washington. McVay is now with Gruden. So people have a ton of respect. But, 30 years old to be a head coach in this league, not much older than Jared Goff, the guy he's supposed to save. I think that's the way the Rams are going. I don't agree with it. I think the 49ers want Josh McDaniels. And for San Diego, I still don't know. I still can't get a beat on that organization. And they're the one wild card.
San Fran,
I think it's McDaniels. I think they're going to wait.
And they can wait because they need a GM.
Yeah. And they've interviewed about 8 or 9 candidates to be the GM. And I think it is going to be that sort of backwards type scenario where I think Jed York is telling them, look, we're going to hire Josh McDaniels to be the head coach if we can. Are you okay with that? Would you be able to work with that? And that's part of what's going on in San Francisco. But again, I think the Patriots are going to the Super Bowl. That could change because it is tough. It is tough in this league to wait that long to hire a head coach. They're already starting to ask questions.
Yeah.
San Francisco.
John, I want to get your opinion on this. I find it interesting. An LA-based developmental football league will challenge college football for players from the ages 19 to 22. The players on average will get paid $50,000 per season. As an alternative to saying, I don't want to go to college. I want to get paid, but I want to play. I'm not ready for the NFL. Do you think this works?
I don't know. I love the idea. I think a bunch of kids in college who have no interest in being in college and really they're just majoring in football, I don't know how much it helps them. I also think if the league develops a system of play that mirrors the NFL, I think the NFL would love it. And the fact that if young players started being schooled a little bit better, at least for the NFL's way of doing things, I think they would be thrilled. So I think there's a lot of potential in it. I think a lot of it makes sense. I talked about the same thing in the NBA. I think they should have that for basketball players as well, because let's face it, they're not really college students. Not all, but a lot of them are just there until they can enter the NFL draft and move forward with their chosen career. And if you can develop some kind of system where they're getting paid while developing, I think that's better for the person.
Yeah. Really interesting concept to say, hey, come here. Basically, your college career will pay you $50,000 to do it, and you get football. Well, I'm very intrigued to see if that actually works. That's something that is in its infancy stages. I guess they're going to try to do it in, the spring or the summer?
Yeah, and I think it was based in California. It's the problem is the structure, the infrastructure, because it's got to be done right. And done right in a way, as I said, where you have to get the proper coaching, number one, because if kids aren't going to go to the league if the ultimate end game isn't the NFL, and if they're not getting tutored properly, and there's not a good system of coaching and development.
And does the NFL even scout them or give them an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it as well, and that's where that comes in. If they're getting the proper guidance and they're developing true prospects, the NFL will love it. They'll certainly scout and be involved and do everything possible. But that, if you just think about everything you have to do to get to that point, as far as the infrastructure, as I said, that's a gargantuan thing to put together.
And different from a league like the XFL, where, again, it's 19 to 22-year-olds only. These are guys who would have had to gone to college. Although 19, you're getting some of those kids who are freshmen that you're missing out on, the 18-year-olds that come out of high school. But we'll keep an eye on that because I do think it's interesting. John, I had a laundry list of other things I wanted to talk about, but as the NFL does sometimes, it consumes us, and we ran out of time.
Hey, that's the way. It's always something going on, I always say, with the NFL.
Mañana, my friend. We'll do it again.
All right. Thanks, Mike.